Good morning, everybody. I understand we're live here at Davos in the salon for a conversation with Crystal Awardee, Renée Fleming, this morning. And I have two logistical things to say before we launch into our conversation. One is, phone's on silent. And second is, of course, you are very welcome to tweet or TikTok or Instagram or whatever you do with a hashtag of WEF23 as well. So what a thrill it is personally for me to be in this conversation with Renée Fleming this morning. I am an opera devotee, and Renée to me represents just the queen of the stage, if I could say that. But today we're not talking about Renée's own outstanding career. We're talking about what she is spearheading with music as a therapy, and also relating to other forms of the arts as well as therapy, for a range of issues to do with health and well-being. It may be a particular condition, maybe all sorts of things, and I'm not the expert, but Renée has invested so much of her own time and passion into this that we're going to explore those issues with her in the short time we have this morning. I know that some of you may have been present at the opening last night where Renée spoke, and that hopefully will also have prompted some questions you might like to ask, because as we go a little way through our session, we're going to throw the floor open to you to come into the conversation directly as well. So Renée, if we got rolling with a really basic kind of question, what got you interested in this very powerful connection between the arts and the mind?
Thank you, Helen. It's really an honor to sit with you. I actually started thinking about this long before I heard about this intersection of arts and health, because performing is hard. It's incredibly challenging. We have to maintain a high standard. And for classical arts, and for what I do, we're dealing with involuntary muscles in the body and trying to train them to do this incredibly odd, sometimes I think it's very odd what we do, type of singing without microphones. So I had a couple of terrible periods with stage fright, but the main thing I had, which was unusual, which is unusual, I don't know of any other of my colleagues who've ever had this, is I had years of somatic pain as a kind of a trade-off for being able to perform well. So, you know, it's complicated. And so that encouraged me to think about the mind-body connection a lot. And this was before medicine had really acknowledged the mind-body connection. I would go to doctors and they'd say, oh, no, that doesn't work. And so now, of course, it's understood more and definitely accepted. So then I started noticing in the papers that people were writing about brain and music, and they were doing this type of research. So I met Francis Collins, Dr. Collins, at a dinner party in Washington. I had just taken a job as a consultant to the Kennedy Center, which is our national performing arts center. And I said, why are researchers studying the brain? You know, don't they have better things to do? And he said, and they're looking at music. And he said, we're looking at music because we want to understand the brain. We have a new brain institute, and music has this tremendous impact on so many parts of the brain, and so that's why we're studying it. So I said, I work at the Kennedy Center. Can we provide a platform for the science, for what you're discovering? Because I think the audience would be very interested to understand more about what happens when they're listening, when they're engaging with the arts in general. So that was 5 years ago, and we have a very, I would say, terrific program. It's kind of called Sound Health, but we're expanding to kind of incorporate the other arts as well. Visual arts is very powerful, and certainly dance.
And dance also, I saw a reference to you discussing dance, for example, with people with Parkinson's.
Right. Yeah. Dance for PD is a program that was developed by Mark Morris's dance company in Brooklyn, and David Leventhal, who runs it, during the pandemic, he started teaching instead of 20 local dance teachers to help patients with Parkinson's and other movement disorders. He started teaching 800 from around the world. There's a booming program in Beijing. It really works. And it's remarkable to see someone who can't move, who can't go through a door, who's shuffling. You put on music with a beat. It's all about rhythm. And suddenly they're fluid. It's really a remarkable thing.
When the pandemic had just begun, you launched a Music and Mind Live series, and you had on this incredible virtual platform a very wide range of experts. And just to pick at random, I mean, one of the issues you picked up was the issue of COVID and loneliness, and I guess what the role of music could be in helping people adjust to the very odd situation we lived in, particularly in 2020, right? Would you like to talk a wee bit about that? Well,
the webinar, none of us like to be grounded, and performers, we were all grounded. We couldn't perform at all. For me, it was well over a year. And so, I was so enjoying this work. I was bringing this work actually to every performance and offering it to the venue and saying, hey, I'll give a kind of an overview of the field. Do you want to invite local scientists, researchers, and healthcare providers? And trying to really connect arts institutions with hospitals, say, or universities. And so this was going well, and people loved it. No, I brought the audience. So I thought, well, let me continue that in a webinar type form while I'm home. So we had 18 episodes, and it really broad array. And the thing I found is, we had the audience was at home, so we're over 700,000 views, and they were stuck, and so were the other people who presented. So pretty much everybody said, sure, I'll go on the show. But Surgeon General Vivek Murthy and so many major researchers came on. Of course, Francis Collins, and it was really, and it still exists. It's on the Sound Health Network website. It's on the Kennedy Center website. It's on my website. If anybody wants just to scroll through and see the titles. It was great fun, and a lot of people, they couldn't believe the interest from around the world.
One of the subjects you picked up in that series was musical interactions with children, which I think would be of particular interest to parents, right?
Right.
How to introduce
definitely.
children. Yeah.
Well, I wonder how many, I would love to take a poll of everyone here and say, how many of you studied a musical instrument as a child? Fantastic. Well, and I would guess that that's true with a large spectrum of people who are here at Davos. And we know that passive learning for children, putting them in front of a screen is not great. But we also know that what's powerful about music instruction is that you have to see a page, translate what's on the page, hear it, and then execute it. And that is so powerful for brain development. It's really a very specific and very effective type of learning for young children. And so it's something that I hope that people will continue to engage in. People aren't studying singing nearly as much. So certainly for child development, they're starting to. We're starting to study, but there's a lot of work on instrumental music. But it's very good, and that particular episode gives, from researchers in Nashville, gives parents specific things they can do with their children. And it's another form of play. It's another form of engagement.
And we were talking a little bit before we began today, Renée, about the potential of music with older people. I mentioned to Renée that my dad is turning 101 in March. He's a lover of music, but also very, very engaged still with the world. But how have you seen this approach working with older people? What's the evidence telling us?
I think it's probably the most important group at this point, because we're living so much longer. And yet the quality of life that people are having is not necessarily that great in the US. There's a tremendous amount of loneliness and isolation. There are so many people who aren't socially engaged. They're hearing, if you're hearing, there's been a lot written about this recently. If you have trouble hearing, you are going to be very isolated. And so that causes depression. And there are so many issues, but of course the disorders of aging, whether dementia and Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, stroke, all of these disorders are really benefit from arts therapies. And frankly, you know, I've said it to friends who've had, have had loved ones with dementia, and they said, you don't have to tell me, I know. When I go in to visit my sister or my mother, and there's a musical therapist who comes, or somebody who comes, engages with them artistically, they light up, they come to life. And what's interesting is some people are trying to research whether or not, because of the plasticity of the brain, whether or not this type of work can be done early, as they begin to detect dementia earlier, to kind of create other areas of memory that can be strengthened. You know, for instance, this musical memory, which is literally the last to go in many patients with Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, I mean, instinctively, we all feel that music must be beneficial in these range of circumstances, but where you've engaged is with those who are researching on the, you know, really on the edge of an emerging field, right? Could you tell us a bit about some of the really exciting developments in this?
Well, the validation is key. You know, our system, I only really know our system, which is rigorous in terms of what's required to prove the efficacy of any kind of intervention. And so we've worked now with the NIH to create a toolkit for research. Like, this is the level of research that we would accept, that we would find acceptable, because ultimately the goal is to have this be reimbursed by insurance companies and really understood the value of it, especially in healthcare and hospital settings. So it's all been very exciting. The NeuroArts blueprint that I mentioned is a much more, I would say, ambitious plan. It's all spelled out. You can read it. You can even read a shorter version. There's a summary of it online. But it seeks to kind of create a field. Climate was not a field 20 years ago. And doing it by taking what's going on now, which is siloed, not always at the highest level of research, and bring it all together, you know, and kind of consolidate what is happening. So I'm so in awe of the two women who have put this together through, as I said, Johns Hopkins University and the Aspen Institute. So that's going to be very exciting. I did a project called Healing Breath with Google Arts and Culture. And in fact, Angelique Joe, who's here, was on it with me. And I asked 14 friends, singers and actors, to share their favorite breathing exercise and sing a stanza. And this was sort of a gesture to help people, lift up people with long COVID, because long COVID is so devastating in terms of suddenly someone can't breathe. They can't, you know, I saw a man crying on a video. I was on a Zoom call with him saying that he was told he'd had 4 years to live. He was a young guy. And he joined this singing group at the LA Opera, and USC, who was doing the research. And he's fine now. I mean, you know, it just, you know, it's a lot of it is kind of lengthening your breath. But you need to have fun while you're doing it. Ideally, you need to be with other people. I mean, people, you know, I think medicine is beginning to understand that we are social creatures, that we are tribal creatures, and you can't just treat body parts. So that is really definitely coming around. And doctors and medical facilities are also understanding that to have arts therapists alongside them alleviates some of the pressure they have to deal with people and not just do their job. So there are many benefits to it. So that's one, Healing Breath. Oh, I'm sorry, we're creating with Johns Hopkins technology that can probably collect data if we can figure out what the right instrument is to help people literally improve their breathing. Because I didn't realize that other than long COVID, breathing issues are far more in COPD, and there's so many pulmonary fibrosis, so many types of disease that could benefit from this. And then the other thing I'm really excited about, I would love to create, this is low-hanging fruit, an app that connects people locally by zip code or by wherever they live to arts interventions that already exist, whether performing arts centers that have performances for children with special needs, Alzheimer's patients and their caregivers. So there's so much that's already offered, but people don't know about it. But also to a stroke choir or to music lessons for your children. Other groups that you can engage with that are artistic. I took a dance for PD class at the Kennedy Center. It was really fun, and it's great exercise. And you sit down, you're seated the whole time. They don't want anybody to fall. So there's so many, there's an explosion of activity in this area, and I'm proud to be an advocate.
Strikes me it's almost a parallel to what has sometimes been talked of as the green prescription from the doctor, right? You present at the doctor and he says, I don't want to give you drugs, I want you to go and have some exercise and eat different food and so on. So you're presenting with something that's non-pharmacological,
right,
but has health benefits.
Health benefits, yes.
Yeah.
In fact, some states are beginning to do this type of prescribing. The UK has something along these lines. And they speak about it really, it's a concierge system where you go in and what ails you, and sometimes it's really not, you don't need to see a doctor, you need something else. So it can again alleviate the pressure and the low morale that we're seeing in healthcare.
But as you say, validation's everything if you're going to get the insurers or the national health systems to actually pay for it. But as you said, they are used to the concept of artists coming into the hospital, right? So it's sort of a stretch on from there.
It's true, and that's sort of we call music medicine, which is when people go in and perform in a healthcare setting, which raises Press-Ganey scores. It lifts patients. It raises all of their kind of the scores that really do affect the bottom line. Hospitals benefit from that. So, but this is another step beyond. These are actual interventions that change people's health.
Now, of course, research always costs, right? Costs money. We're at the WEF with its very large private sector constituency, and one of the questions I think we could discuss is how can the private sector help the kind of advocacy you are doing, the research that needs to be done to keep the validation going, keep moving, the frontiers of this field?
Well, in a couple of ways. One, that when I mentioned the art care, of course, I'm hoping that it makes sense that it would be with a major insurance company or with a pharmaceutical company as something positive that they can do for patients. And as I said, there are national organizations that said, oh, we already have this information, we can plug that in for you, the performing arts and different organizations. So that's one thing that I could be helped with for sure. And then, of course, once we develop the right tool, pulmonologists at Johns Hopkins said they're desperate for something that could actually give an early diagnosis, because people, he said, nobody comes to me unless they're in a late stage of disease with pulmonology issues. Because people just think, oh, I'm getting older, or I have a cough, it's nothing. He said, but if a doctor had a little simple kazoo or a harmonica that you could take home that would measure and then also help you improve, he said, I'm dying for something like this. So that's something I'm sure that people will want to develop in terms of healthcare. But it's funding absolutely is tremendous. Funding the research. I have a small foundation. Now I'm also creating grants for young people, encouraging them already at the university level to start engaging in research using an artist and a scientist together. So this type of thing is really kind of just helping along But there's no question that the research is expensive and it's time consuming. And but people are doing it. I mean, and bringing it all together is huge. The fact that the NIH is now funding research, we know it's not what they put into other major diseases, but it's a validation of the field, which will enable everybody to feel great about doing this and continue on.
And the universities and research institutions you're working with, are they getting to the point where they're offering, for example, students a paper in this based on the research and learning?
Well, there is, if you go to the NIH website and look in integrative medicine, so I go to the website a lot now for the NIH because you find out what the latest research is on any particular subject. And so it tells you exactly what they've funded, which projects, and it's very broad. You know, one of the areas that I love that's so much fun is evolution. And Ani Patel at Tufts is studying animals to understand, you know, we can't really study ancient humans, but you can kind of study animals and think about how they evolved, which probably relates to how we evolved. And so there are just so many offshoots of this that are great fun. But yeah, no, I think people are definitely, there's a lot of work at the university level being done.
Yeah, and for students to be able to actually take a paper and say, wow, you know, this is something that really excites them, I think would be great, yeah. Listen, we want to bring the audience into the conversation. We've got so many potential starters here, over here. And wait for the microphone. And we're on TV, and great if you can say who you are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm David Victor from UC San Diego. Thank you very much for being here.
Yes, thank you.
Two quick questions. One is a very American question. What's your sense of where you are in getting the insurance companies to be excited about this? You mentioned measuring performance. I'm just curious as to your assessment. And second is, there are all these different areas of brain science. Are there one or two that seem to give you the most promise that you keep coming back to and focusing on? Is it about aging, or what are the areas of brain science that you find to be most exciting?
Well, disorders of aging is probably the biggest at this point because there are so many, and aging is something that, as I said, is because we're living so long, is something that we really have to contend with. You've worked on this a lot too, I think, Helen, which is wonderful. So, but definitely, I mean, the more the scans, they're expensive too, and this type of research, definitely. But melodic intonation therapy keeps coming back. I mean, veterans, the work that's being done with Walter Reed, and Walter Reed has very deep pockets, and they're doing incredible things with veterans. Music therapy, visual art therapy. But it's definitely, this is very early stages for the research, honestly. The building blocks, I was shocked when I attended my first convening at the NIH at how micro the pieces of research are that people are doing, because they're building the field from the bottom up. I think of it as creating a wall. And so it's going to be a long time, I think, before this gets fully condoned. Now, the blueprint seeks, they're talking about a true value, a different way of looking at the efficacy of research, a way of looking at how does this affect the economy? How does this affect, they did a study with KPMG, and they found that they're spending 2/3 less than they normally would if they have arts in, particularly with dementia. They looked at dementia specifically. It really saves money. It saves money in terms of caregiver costs, in terms of healthcare costs, because you're helping people remain that much more in the world and better. So there are other ways of looking at this. So I would track what they're doing because it's really interesting. In other words, if businesses would find that you're going to save a lot of money if you invest in bringing arts into these healthcare situations, they're going to do it.
Yeah.
And so that may precede actually healthcare saying, okay, we have a body of research that actually proves X, Y, and Z for health outcomes. But what's there is definitely proven. And I talked about a few of those things. And by the way, USC is looking for partners up and down the state of California with this particular piece they're doing.
Travel by canoe.
Okay.
As you're speaking, Renée,
what a few weeks, I know.
What ran through my mind was, in public life, you you visit many care facilities for older people, and I must say I've never seen in such facilities in my country the use of music with dementia. So I can just see this could be an explosive
Yes,
field.
please.
Explosive. And as you say, the people who are providing...
I'm surprised, actually.
It just amazes me, but now I focus on it. Never seen it. Yeah.
There should be choirs at least.
I think. Right, others like to come in? Yes, please. Another Crystal Awardee.
Yes.
Mylin, I'm in Manhattan. I had a question. Have they done any, it's very early research, but mapping whether instrumental versus vocals changes the brain patterns, if they're tracking that? Or how have, whether it's instrumental or vocals, has there been a sort of a difference in how people relate?
I don't know that they've mapped specifically the difference, looking at the difference. As I said, a lot of this type of, a lot of the studies of, and actually USC has done some with LA Philharmonic, they've actually looked at improvement in children's brains, and they found that they definitely had, we know intrinsically that it's attention, it's focus, it's behavioral issues can be helped. Parents reported that their children who were hyperactive, who had ADHD, had less. And of course, singing uses also so much of language. So that's definitely Broca's area. That's a different part of the brain. Instrumental, because there's a different type of movement, I'm sure it would be a little bit different. But I mean, I can't wait to see what comes down the pike with really looking at specifics about this. It's the potential is so interesting.
So exciting.
But again, it's all evolution. We just don't change. And I sometimes wonder if we don't acknowledge that we all have this creative impulse, this need to also be together. This is why, also for aging as well, being in a group, making music, whether it's a rock band or a choir, can be incredibly helpful. Yeah. You said your dad is quite social.
Yes. but loves music and can still, even if you can perch him on the piano stool, go crash, crash, crash.
That's great.
But it's to be encouraged, right?
Yes.
I'm really encouraged by listening to you to go back and make sure he does more of it.
I just visited our favorite, my favorite soprano, Leontine Price, and I hadn't seen her since before the pandemic, and she answered the door singing a high C, and she's well into her 90s, and I just was so uplifted. My visit with her, just absolutely, I'm still happy when I think about it.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Anyone else like to pop a last thought or question? Yes?
Edwina Von Gall from New York. Just a little bit, excuse me, back to what Maya was saying, but I'm interested in nature and healing, and I'm wondering if there's a connection that takes us back to our origins, that about whether rhythms from nature have an intrinsically more recognizable, or that you innately respond to
Absolutely.
in a way that's different.
Well, rhythm is kind of it's the root of everything. It's the root of everything. Literally, the cells in our bodies are run with rhythms. And when I think about nature, first of all, neuroaesthetics is a field which is actually the discipline of Susan Mag-Salmon, who created this NeuroArts blueprint, one of the team. And neuroaesthetics is talking so much about the importance of beauty, the importance of awe. Awe improves our health. And being in nature instills these kinds of feelings and emotions in us. Emotion is such a powerful driver. We can't forget how incredible, we try to ignore it and pretend we don't have it, because we think about it usually when it's negative, but it is an extreme driver. But there's no question that all of these experiences are important. I'm just wrapping up an anthology that brings together tons of writers, and one of them is Liz Dillard, the architect, talking about how green space is so important, and how certainly, specifically in New York City, we're not we're not really, giving an inch to that we don't have to. That's not profitable. So thinking about the future of how we want to live, especially also post-pandemic, and even theaters are problematic because of the bottlenecks. But we saw what happened to our mental health during the pandemic, and this was isolation. And anxiety and fear, and these are all powerful emotions that can be helped with these various therapies. So much of this therapy is occurring on telehealth now, and post-COVID patients are gathering in large groups on telehealth with therapists, and it really makes a difference. But rhythm is, you feel rhythm in your spine before you are aware of it. Before it goes to the brain, it enters into the spine. I didn't know that. I thought that was interesting. So it's key, definitely.
Well, on that note, doesn't half an hour fly by? I've always believed that music and the arts generally are food for the soul, and I think we've been given new ways today of thinking about that food for the soul. So thank you, Renée, for your commitment to this. It's just wonderful to hear you speak and know that you are really leading for these kinds of therapies, practices, understandings to be incorporated into our understanding of health and well-being. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you.